I am Dr. Rasan Harris, CEO of Citizens Committee for New York City. I also have the pleasure of being a board member of Exponent Philanthropy. So glad that you're joining us for this session, Preparing Yourself to Lead Through Crisis. Personally, I have so many stories to tell on the topic, and I am so glad that I'm joined by two of my board members, and you'll get some other voices from Citizens Committee in here too to talk about what your foundation, board, and staff can do to develop shared goals in the midst of a crisis, and how to make decisions, align, engage in dialogue, learn from each other, data and diversity, and hopefully work to get to a better place together, even in the midst of crisis. So I am going to introduce my co-panelist. But fun fact about me is I began my leadership on March 16th, 2020. That was the day in New York City where you were told, we need you to pause, slow down, maybe stay at home a little bit. And that was my first day on the job. So it was the first day that my family had to figure out how to school from home. And I also had to learn how to run a grant making organization that gives resources to local neighborhood level leaders around New York City to improve their quality of life, particularly neighborhoods that need access to opportunity. And what a time to get that honor to run the organization in the midst of crisis, which, interestingly enough, harken back to our founding year, 1975. We were founded in the midst of crisis.
One grows up loving a place and wanting to help it.
The problem in this country is that the major problems are not being paid attention to. We have an urban society, yet the cities are not paid attention to.
The fact is that our great urban areas are the engines of our society. In their glorious diversity, our cities define our national character, and none more forcefully than this international metropolis.
I got the opportunity to run our organization in the midst of what's happening right now in New York City, but in the United States and in the larger world. So leading through crisis, I think we should have a PhD in doing that, because that is our story here at Citizens Committee. I am joined by two of my board members and would like to have Tatiana Gutierrez introduce herself.
Hi, everybody. I'm Tatiana Gutierrez. I'm a partner at Nixon Peabody. I'm an affordable housing attorney and a more recent board member of Citizens Committee.
Hi, and I'm Janelle DeCoto. I am an attorney, the general counsel and managing director at Ziff Capital Partners. I am a longstanding board member of Citizens and have had the pleasure of seeing Citizens through many years of ups and downs, and very fortunate to be on this team during this particularly interesting and crisis that is lasting longer than I think any of us are happy about at this point.
We wanted to make sure that we define terms. I'm going to start first with a couple. We want to define what we mean by grant making and philanthropy, and I'll ask Janelle and Tatiana to weigh in on some other thoughts. So for us, grant making, what does grant making mean? It's why we're all at this conference. We are all grant making institutions that we get applications from folks in the field. I guess some of you don't get applications, but you survey folks who are in the field and you see what they're doing, and you provide financial resources to enable them to do their work to hopefully create some good out there in the world. So Citizens Committee, although we do raise money to give it away, we're like a community foundation. we are squarely using grant making as one of our tools for making change in New York City. Secondly, philanthropy is not equal to grant making, because philanthropy is much larger than just grant making. We recognize that when people give of their time, carving out time in their schedule to make a difference to improve their community, that matters. And giving of their talent, utilizing specific skills that they have to bring to bear as they're giving their time, are really important ways to investing in improving New York City communities. And obviously the treasure of giving of their money, that's like what grant making is. And giving of time, talent, and treasure is the way we define philanthropy. We recognize that giving money away is one of the tools that helps us enact and live philanthropy, but also finding ways to catalyze the uses of time and folks' talents to better New York City and neighborhoods is also extremely important. How would it define leadership as it exists in getting this work done? We put it within a staff and community context. Janelle, could you speak to that to a certain extent?
Sure, I think so. When I think about leadership and the way that we've thought about leadership through citizens, see that leadership from the staff perspective in terms of building an organization and helping them get to that place. And then we see it on the flip side in the community, growing the community's skills and enlarging the idea of their specific grants.
Janelle, that's so helpful. And also, I'm going to ask you to define governance next, but I also wanted to add, for those that don't know Citizens Committee, it was built on the idea that every New Yorker can make a difference by just rolling up their sleeves and getting to work. And sometimes rolling up your sleeves and getting to work meant cleaning up your street or starting a block association. Sometimes it meant registering people to vote. Sometimes it meant engaging young people in the community to do work. Sometimes it meant getting folks who are at the margins and that aren't engaged and getting them more engaged in basically the civic process and in the life of New York City, whether it's recent immigrants or folks that might have been written off because of their socioeconomic status, different ethnicities. And all those different leaders from all those different communities can apply for a grant to be able to add to the fabric of New York City. So it's the idea that everyone can make a difference regardless of what neighborhood you come from, and that we can add you to our family and give you support in the terms of a micro grant to allow you to give life to the project that you're proposing. So those are the folks who are providing leadership for us by their actions every day. Now, can you talk about governance in regards to how we define governance and talk about the board interacting with us?
Absolutely. But Rahsaan, before I go to governance, I just want to build on your point in terms of the very idea of citizens and kind of embodying leadership. So, our organization, just by its very nature, seeks and finds leaders because they are the ones who are proposing to create projects in their communities. And so one of the things that I love about the organization is that we really empower people to do that which they may not have otherwise had the opportunity to do. And through that empowerment, we get to meet and help develop, in some cases, more and more leaders. We've seen some really great leaders come from our grant making program. So it really is a partnership. When I think about governance, one of the things that I think we've found to be really important is just the strength of our board and the creation of active dialogue within our board, and that communication between the board and the staff being very important. And so what does governance mean? It really means the active dialogue with a purpose between our staff and our board of directors. And, obviously I'm a lawyer by training, so I can't help but really enjoy having very concrete rules and processes to conduct our work. But I think what's really important in terms of governance is flexibility. It's the ability to hear each other, engage in active dialogue, meet the moment, and have that flexibility turn into efficiencies and process. And that's what we've done, I think, really well at Citizens. Meet the moment. We're really great listeners, and then take action based on that. And I think Rasan does an amazing job of helping to facilitate that communication and really fine-tune governance in that context.
Thank you for that plug. I really love structure, because structure gives you the rules by which you can get things done. And I do think that when you don't pay attention to structure, sometimes you're leaving a tool for creating good dialogue or processes that allow you to get through decisions. Here's the meat. Crisis. So Tatiana, can you talk to us a little bit about crisis? Like, how have you seen crisis and how we're defining crisis in this moment? It's kind of obvious to a certain extent, but giving it some kind of articulation would be helpful from your perspective.
Sure. Thank you, Rasan. I came onto the board at the end of 2019. So it was fairly quickly that I really got into the crisis mode on Citizens. So I have to be honest, I really don't have a great amount of recollection of not being in crisis mode at Citizens. I am also a lawyer by training, but substantively have, been in the community organizing, tenant rights, tenant organizing, community development and housing field since 2002. So by substance, Citizens Committee was of deep interest to me because it worked in the community. And I think that the fact that that Citizens doesn't just provide microgrants to nonprofits or to 501c3s, but to community groups generally, was of deep interest to me, just because I think there's a lot that goes on at that level that is, grassroots. I came up during a certain time in our political history where grassroots movements where I think people are able to see nationally the power of grassroots and of organizing. I like many of us, am a working parent. I'm actually a single working parent of 2 children with special needs, and that March 16th and when that started, the pandemic started, was personally just a really a crisis, a crisis moment. And for me personally, Citizens and Rasan taking the helm at that time really framed the issue. It really, I think like Rasan's leadership really was able to define the moment that, yes, we were struggling because we were having to work at home and school our children, but we were also in contact with our partners all over the 5 boroughs who were reporting back food insecurity. And that really, and I remember early on, our board meetings during those first 6 months, they really helped define the moment for me, of wow, you know, we are really in touch with the people who have the direst needs in, you know, in the 5 boroughs. And our amazing board showed up and were there to with ideas and with support and with, you know, let's say emergency authorizations for funds, you know. And I just saw this organization just act and respond in this amazing way, both from the staff level and Rasan, of presenting to us, look, here are folks, here are community groups who are in the thick of it. And we were hearing it right straight from the source. And then our wonderful board members, you know, just doing everything they could to meet those needs. You know, I would say Citizens has just, you know, become such an important part of my life at this point. Rasan, did that answer your question?
No, that was incredible. And, you know, I want to say, I've been humbled by having this opportunity. It's been humbling. To lead this organization, it's been humbling to have, you know, I've been in board meetings, I've been on staff meetings where my daughter has come in the middle of it, because the reality is you're working at home and trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy and trying to provide supports. You know, I've had community members and friends pass away during the pandemic, not necessarily because of COVID, but all of the COVID adjacent things. I live in Harlem and I've seen the nature of the neighborhood change because of COVID. So the crisis is real, and being able to communicate on different levels with board members and with community members, and being a boundary spanner, connecting those conversations so that we can figure out what we can do together to solve this, has definitely been an honor and a privilege. One of our board members, Nithya, did a podcast, and this is one of the things that came out of our response to the pandemic. Was we created Citizens NYC Live platforms where we did some Zoom calls, we've created a podcast, we have different content we've created. And she spoke with one of our past board members about the moment and the crisis.
Citizens Committee has evolved and it stayed true to its mission, but has had to be agile to what the needs of the city are. Obviously, none of this was planned, but for us to have our first Black CEO, although I really do wish that we could have had an easier onboarding for him that didn't involve working from home in a pandemic, really sort of brought to life for me, oh, you know, this is how we really evolve. This is how we actually represent the communities. A lot of them, underserved minorities, don't, you know, have access to so much. And then when the pandemic hit, they're also the worst hit. So I was and continue to be proud that we stay aligned to the original mission of really helping New York thrive and helping the most disadvantaged communities thrive. But it's even more so now during the pandemic that feels like a renewed sense of mission.
You know, her comments, your comments, Tatiana, just being in this with other stakeholders, trying to figure out what we need to do and what it means is really so important. Before I came on, we were in a little bit of a steady state moment for Citizens Committee. It was presented to me that because, you know, life wasn't rosy for everybody, but we were working with community members, and a lot of the proposals we got were around beautification, community gardens, and what folks can do to beautify their neighborhoods. And hopefully that beautification and creating spaces where folks could gather can lead to other changes that improve their lives. Well, the pandemic hit and basic needs became front and center, and the way we thought about our work needed to pivot. Our mission didn't change, but the way we thought about it definitely needed to change. So in order to be ready for the moment, you got to be ready to adapt. And I think there are 3 Ds to being able to adapt in the moment and not becoming a dinosaur. Number one, it's being able to have some facility with data. Number two, it's being able to engage intelligently in dialogue. And number three is to meaningfully engage diversity so that you don't have blind spots. And what I'd like to do with the rest of the time that we have on this panel is to talk about some stories of like how we engaged data, dialogue, and recognizing the importance of diversity to get our work done. And I'd like for you to think about, as an audience member for this panel, how those 3 Ds show up in your work and how you can improve them, how you engaging them, and how you can talk to other colleagues of even improving and becoming an expert in those practices.
I mean, I can say a few words. I just remember that, you know, the top issue was food insecurity, or one of the top issues. And we spent a significant amount of time on that. And it was really, you know, it really just, it was shocking to me that it had happened so quickly. It helped me to understand, you know, so much better the community that I live in, and, you know, the people who make it up, and the reasons, you know, why food insecurity had hit so quickly, you know, and the neighborhoods and the demographics around that. You know, the fact that we were able to have that information, I think was huge. I didn't, you know, I don't really know that I saw it coming out of like major news networks and that kind of thing until sometime after that. You know, so I mean, that was really a sense ahead thing. That was a, you know, information is power, and, you know, information is power when you're trying to help people too. And having that information and being able to coalesce around that, I think was, you know, it was really powerful.
And to bring the story in full context, I got the offer letter to work at Citizens Committee in January. My first day was March 16th. And then as the pandemic started to unfold in March, the staff recognized, even before I came on, that we needed to hear from our grantee partners, not just through the application process, because the application for our grants had closed by the end of January. So a survey was deployed to grantee partners and other applicants that at its height got to 1,000 New Yorkers who responded and let us know what their needs were. And as I said earlier in this conversation, we've gone through a part where, you know, urban environmentalism and beautification and green spaces would quite easily our front and forward facing project priority in regards to what we were seeing. The surveys brought in basic needs were brought to the fore. And so food insecurity, income insecurity, needs for health, whether mental or physical, came to the fore, and even the need to help the elderly who felt isolated. And being able to go to my first board meeting with that data that we got from that survey, and compared to the data we had before in the form of proposals that we had from our grantee partners, created a fuller picture for our board members of what moment we were in. People before who were talking about block association grants and planting trees and flowers, we're talking about providing food and masks and checking in on the elderly. Same organization, but them rising to the moment because COVID dictated it. And having that data and being able to talk explicitly with the board added so much to us. And now I wanted to know if you had any comments on that.
Sure. I'd just like to add, and to Rasan and Tatiana's point, the data itself kind of highlights that get back to governance. It kind of highlighted the need for us to be very nimble in the moment. So all of the types of projects that we had been very comfortable and familiar with doing in the past were suddenly not necessarily as important or as urgent to attend to in the moment. And it called for us to assess what we could do for New York City in a time of crisis within our mission and to pivot in that way to be able to meet the moment. And so it meant that we needed to sort of update our governance and have a more cutting edge way of conducting ourselves so that we could more quickly address any of the issues in the moment. And it meant, and I know this is Rasan's next D, it meant faster and more consistent dialogue among the board members, among the staff, to assess whether we were addressing the needs quickly enough, or the needs were kind of changing real time, and whether we could get to them in a way that really would be helpful to New Yorkers. And we kind of knew that time was of the essence at all moments. And the faster that we could deploy funds and assess whether it was something that we could do, the better it would be for helping our community. And so it led to, from a lot more of a long-term perspective, us reassessing our board's governance program in terms of how do we in the future more efficiently and more quickly, as a matter of course and not as a matter of an emergency, engage with each other to make quick decisions. And so what that looked like for us was updating our committee system and generally figuring out how we can move information and make decisions more quickly and efficiently through our governance program, our governance structure.
I love the fact that you highlighted that dialogue generates understanding. And so some of the things you might take for granted in your communication in a body, whether it's within staff or within the board, in the midst of the crisis, sometimes it allows you to reevaluate, or how well are we in dialogue with one another? So you brought the example on the board level. I think it's worth reevaluating how you're in dialogue with your community partners. So a story that I have is we created that Citizens NYC Live platform. One of the spaces we created was what we called a neighborhood chat. Because of COVID, couldn't be in community in the exact same way. And I was a new CEO. So we tried to create this space where past grantee partners and applicants can come and talk to me and to program staff in these Zoom meetings where they can ask questions about our priorities and how we're making grants, and even talk to key issues and be in breakout rooms with one another to talk about what they're going through in this moment. So we created a space for them using the technology to have greater dialogue through Citizens NYC Live and through those neighborhood chats that we had. And we've also tried to broadcast and preserve them by putting them on YouTube, so folks who weren't there in the moment had a chance to at least learn from it and be there. I also want to make a plug. Dialogue also happened for us on Clubhouse. We had the good fortune of having an article on the Chronicle of Philanthropy on our efforts to be on Clubhouse to broaden dialogue through our engagement with folks across the world who are on Clubhouse, but also trying to get our grantee partners from New York City on there so they can access that social capital that you can have by talking to different people into different spaces. Tatiana wanted to know if there are any other things that you wanted to talk about in regards to dialogue that you thought that was important that we had on the board.
Thanks, Rasan. I think another thing that I wanted to mention was the opportunity to expand on the mission of an organization by board members collaborating, with staff and with, grantees here in order to really spread the message of Citizens Committee and what it does and where it goes in the community. So just as an example, I am at the law firm Nixon Peabody, which is it's a big law firm with offices all over the country. And we have a mental health and well-being committee in all of the offices. And they were very interested in highlighting one of Citizens Committee's New Yorkers for New York honorees this past year, Nicole Lee. Janelle kind of mentioned her earlier. She is just a fantastic person. And she, a mother of special needs son who really, did amazing things in her, in her borough in Queens, Far Rockaway, to, provide more, to provide options for special needs children who needed daycare.
I am 39 years old. I've built multiple business in New York City. I started in childcare because my son is autistic and I couldn't find proper childcare for him. With that, I've seen it's been a hard road with that. I've seen such a lack of resources in our neighborhoods, and I decided to build upon that and bring those resources to us. I actually learned about Citizens NYC through a friend of mine. Once I tried and filled the application out, everybody seemed very helpful. I actually was awarded 2 grants in 1 year, and I was so excited. I'm like, oh. You guys helped me grow in such an amazing way, and I'm just happy to have you guys with me. With that unity together, we can make miracles happen. I believe that our communities need a renegade revolutionist like me.
That I, as a mother of a special needs kid, childcare and schooling is very, very difficult. So I always really identified with her, from the moment that I first, met her at one of the board meetings during the summer of 2020, where she came and talked about, what she did and, the activism that she, has the leadership she has shown on these issues in Queens and now, further afield. And so we did a webinar for, internal and external clients of Nixon Peabody, highlighting mental health and well-being and how, we touched on special needs parenting and the supports that are needed. And we touched on, just New York City and how small businesses were getting through COVID in New York City. And we did it through, it was sponsored by the Mental Health and Wellbeing Committee of New York City and Long Island for the firm, but also was part of an impact, project that the law firm, has been highlighting. And, so that was just, there are so many people that were now able to hear about Citizens Committee, through this webinar and could see really firsthand what the organization is about.
That is, it's so great for folks to, in the midst of the world being topsy-turvy, to find yourself in stories that resonate with you and bringing your authentic self and your story into the endeavor. So Tatiana, your connection to Nicole expanded a conversation that was shared with a larger community. So as New York City and other parents are trying to figure out how to sort themselves, they're benefiting from you and Nicole sharing of yourselves. And that dialogue and conversation, I think, just adds to the richness of the way we think about solutions and what we think about getting done. So we talked about data, which can sound a little bit, I guess, staid and stoic. Talked about dialogue, which can get hopefully understanding that feedback loop and be a little bit more dynamic. But when you're also talking about the dialogue, it matters who you're talking to and what you're talking about and who's included and who's not there. So the last D is diversity. And I believe that diversity of who's around the table really increases the rigor of your solution finding. It eliminates blind spots. And in the moment, we talk about the twin pandemics. We had the pandemic caused by COVID, but we also had this racial reckoning in the murder of George Floyd and what it did for our country and how we talked about race and how we dealt with each other. I think it's really important to really engage diversity, not from a place of fear, like I'm going to mess this up or I'm not an expert, but in authentic dialogue and having it grounded in some of the data that helps us explore some of these issues and figuring out how we're making a difference. The diversity part that I want to personally say, I really appreciate, I did not get hired because I was a person of color, for sure, because I had to do all the work to show myself capable of leading this organization, even pre-pandemic. But it was not lost on me the fact that I am an African-American male, and being the first Black man to run Citizens Committee since its founding in 1975, that the board, seeing what I brought from a diverse perspective, being useful as we're trying to bring New York forward and improve it for all New Yorkers, was humbling. Again, I've probably used that word too many times in this conversation, but it was really important because it allowed me to figure out that I can be a part of, bringing these worlds together and scaring up important conversations. And lo and behold, the crisis hits, and the skill sets of being a boundary spanner and being able to be in courageous conversations about difference became even more critical for our work. Citizens has always supported, if you look at the data, folks who are in community and folks that need access to opportunity. And I think that skews, if you look back, because of our intentional approach to supporting a lot of, Black and Indigenous and people of color communities. It just so happened that now in this moment that we have a language to talk about it, and being explicit about how we're seeking out diversity has given us a true opportunity to show up in this moment. There was one example where dialogue and diversity came together, which is I tried to bring a conversation to the board to talk about race, and have our board is racially diverse, but majority white, having white allies talking about how to engage in conversations about racial diversity, and not from a place of shame, but from a place of recognizing what we know and recognizing what we need to grow and figuring out how that affects the way we think about our work. And I was really happy about the dialogue that the board was able to have on it, but wanted to give Tatiana and or Janelle to talk about other aspects of diversity and how it shows up in the work and how do you think it adds value?
I think I appreciated Rasan's courage in bringing these issues to the board and making a comfortable space for many people to really engage on these topics. I think that's really important. And it gets back to just our, what dialogue can do generally, in terms of increasing the efficiency and the efficacy of your organization, being able to bring your authentic self and encouraging authenticity in the room is always helpful in moving things forward and having difficult conversations in the time of crisis when they occur. So all of that sort of helps. Having that authenticity and openness is helpful to the overall efficiency of your organization, and especially of our organization. But one of the things that I think, as Tatiana mentioned, just her ability to relate to the single mother who is a mother of children with special needs, that type, there are many ways for us to show up in our authentic selves. And diversity, true diversity means, me showing up as a Black woman, as a Caribbean American, as a person who grew up in Miami, Florida, as a lawyer, and all of those different pieces put together, and bringing that to the conversation as someone whose family grew up in Bed-Stuy and spent every summer in Bed-Stuy growing up. And I think all of those pieces, when we're talking about how we connect with our community and how best to understand where our grantees are coming from, kind of adds to the conversation in much the same way that connecting in the context of, having a shared college experience or being from the same town now or going to, special events or joining a country club are shared experiences that connect us in other ways day to day. And so I think I'm very grateful, despite the tragedy and despite the sadness that came with our George Floyd experience and the sort of racial reckoning that was, I wouldn't say maybe recognized anew, despite the fact that it's always kind of here, kind of gave reassess what it means to be your authentic self in the context of our organizations, what it means to have that authenticity help our grantees and the people in our community, and hopefully just expands our understanding of each other and the ways in which we can help each other.
That is so fantastic. Tatiana, any last words? Because I think the whole piece of understanding each other and being able to come together, that's at our mission, Citizens Committee, which I think makes our mission stand the test of time. But also, I think it's something that we all need in this country and society in these times. Tatiana, any last words from you?
It was really powerful. I remember that, that board meeting we had where we had, you facilitated, you and some of your guests facilitated, these difficult conversations. And it was just such an example of how to do something like that. And it was the first time that I had ever seen something like this happen, at a professional organizational level like that. And I think that, since then, I think that there is a movement just generally, in the United States around these issues. I know, I've been in real estate for a long time, but it's just now that people are really starting to line up all the pieces of real estate, so not just the capital, but also the developers, who are doing the on the ground development, and the tenants, and the supportive services providers. Those things are lining up now to have one conversation like they really never have before this time. It's like everybody used to have their own conversations and there weren't all of the conversations coming together. And so I think that, I know for me, I will, as I'm out and about in the world and in my world, people will say more and more to me, clients, and people in my, in industry, hey, we really want to engage around these issues. And I say, oh, well, you can talk to Dr. Rahsaan Harris. He is a leader in talking about these issues. And so for me, that's been a really, that again, has been a really powerful tool, to amplify different voices and bring different people to the table.
Well, thank you. Our time on this panel has come to a close. I want to thank you, Tatiana and Janelle, and for all of you who joined us. Hopefully you've been in the chat. You are finding ways to follow us so we can continue this conversation. But ultimately, we need to innovate. We need to look at data. We need to be in dialogue, and we need to stretch ourselves to get diverse perspectives so that we can get to a better future together.
Here we go. We are going to attempt a block sing. There's no heaven if you try. No hell below us. Imagine all the people living for today. say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you'll join us, and the